Hello and welcome to the expansion room. My name is Shervon Laurice, and today we are going to be talking about a topic near and dear to my heart. And let's start with first a question. What if the very parts of you that you have learned to hide or minimize are actually the keys to your next level success? And so in today's episode, I have my guest, Chanoa Inez. She is an author and personal brand mentor. And together we're going to be exploring how to reclaim your true identity after loss or upheaval, and how unlocking joy and resilience and your own very magnetism that exists inside of you unlocks opportunities that you could not force through hustle alone. So, Shanoa, welcome.
Thank
I would
you.
love it if you introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself and your history and what brought you to this kind of work.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm the author of Dream On, How to Create the New Life of Your Dreams After Upheaval or Loss. And I'm also the creator of Magnetize Your Personal Brand, which incorporates some of those principles.
Yeah.
I definitely was not planning to go into the personal transformation space, even though I have a deep personal interest and passion in that. But my story begins actually in 2011, the story that where my book begins. So I was living in Miami, and I was living with my boyfriend who's from Montenegro, and as soon as I went there on vacation, I just had a really hard time returning home. Everyone was asking about the pictures and videos they saw, and I literally couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I always knew I wanted to move, I just didn't know where. So it had a profound impact on me. So we agreed the next summer we'd go again for summer vacation, but we'd organize our businesses and, put our things in storage to see if it works out business-wise. We'll just stay there to live there after vacation. And if not, we could always just go back. So we had this flexibility to test it out. And it was the first time in my life up until then that vacation, the first day in Montenegro, that second year, everything felt perfect. It was the first time in my life, zero problems. Everything just felt magical. We spent a wonderful day in the capital with his parents, and then in the evening we were on the seacoast, and just, everything was just magical. But unfortunately, in the morning I woke up and he did not. And it was, it was just really shocking, especially, being in my 20s. It's kind of the last thing on your radar.
Right.
Yeah. So I was a shock to all of us, but, I took it harder than I needed to, let's say that, even though it was a tragedy. I didn't have those tools to see, or the insights to know, okay, if you sit with your grief and kind of ride it all the way to the bottom, what that can do to you, emotionally, physically, all those things I didn't know. And so my whole world was basically wrapped, we were our lives were so intertwined, and I felt like part of me had died. And I suddenly found, for a long time I didn't care about so many things, I was still very conscientious when it comes to work and things like that. But, there was a strange period. I mean, I think 6 months, nothing scared me. Things that used to scare me, nothing scared me. And
Yeah.
I realized how jarring that was, because I realized, wow. Thankfully that phase did change, but it was a real shock, and I regressed to basically whatever wisdom I'd gained until then. It kind of went out the window, But the good news is, actually, counterintuitively, I started developing many health problems as the years went on. And I thought that I was healed from the grief at that point, by that time in my life. And I didn't make the connection that I still had this unprocessed grief in the background. The good news about having those health challenges is doctors never actually did anything to move the needle or anything they asked me to take. So I set off on this journey that took me into, meditation, yoga, anything, energy healing, plant medicine, whatever you want. I was there on a plane to go try and figure things out. And the good news about that is that I started learning so much about personal transformation. But the irony is everything I did and everything I learned, it helped a little bit, but nothing really moved the needle because I didn't have that foundation in place. So it was like when a part of me died, when he passed away, it was like my confidence went away, and I didn't realize like the self-love was like very low. And I thought that was something if you asked me if you love yourself, I would say of course, but I didn't realize the decisions I was making in life didn't reflect that. Like, who were my friends? What are the things I was accepting into my life? So the biggest change, even though I was searching, didn't really happen until I moved to LA, because I did stay in Europe after that happened. When I moved back went to the States, I was missing the States. I decided to go to LA, and the identity shift happened almost right away, where suddenly I could start eating foods I couldn't eat before, because I'd broken out of my everyday, like seeing the same people, being in the same, you're looking through the same eyes every day, same environment. Right. You just don't, it's hard to change. But then a few years later, I started doing self-love work when I realized, oh my gosh, like I still have these friendships. There's something I'm not getting that I was just not seeing. And I recognized the victim mindset I had that was then amplified after he'd passed away so suddenly. And once all those things became clear to me, things started speeding up. My health challenges started going away. Then I started doing more advanced form of meditation, and the healing just continued. But my life, there's like my life before that happened, my life after that happened, and then my life now. It's like three different people.
Okay, you've lived 3 different lives.
At least. I mean, that's just those 3. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
It's funny, we chuckle about that, but oftentimes our lives get segmented in that kind of way, before and after. Even when we came out of the pandemic, I've known many people who say things like in the before times, right? It really indicating before the pandemic.
Right.
And or they'll say in these times, they're making these distinctions, but we all do it to some level, right? Our time frames in our lives are encapsulated by usually some event or some time frame. And so I'm wondering for you, how did that, and that sounds like it was a major life disruption, right? It was such a surprise, especially for the age you were.
Yeah.
So how do major life disruptions like that shift or reshape identity, right? And what determines whether we stay stuck? Because you were kind of in this place for a little while, and it seems like once you moved to LA, there was a shedding in some level, as well as doing some of the healing work you did. There was a shedding in some level, but over time, it took you some time to get unstuck.
Yeah, it took me a long time, and that's part of the reason I wrote my book, because there was just like a distinct moment when I was walking across my living room and I realized like everything just felt wonderful in life, and I realized I only just came out of that cloud of grief. I was carrying it this whole time.
Yeah.
And then I walked a few more steps and realized there's a book. I have to write this book, and I was like feeling nervous about it, but I realized it's something that had to happen, because it was a book I needed, because we don't have to, it doesn't have to take that long. It could, there's a time for grief, but there's no reason to prolong it that much. But as far as the identity, what happens, it really depends on how we respond, right? Yeah. And I hesitate to give people, rules and restrictions around how much time to grieve and, their approach to it, as long as it's a healthy approach. But there's going to be that period, and nobody can tell you how long that is. But then you have to be careful because there's that window that can be like surreptitious, where it feels like, oh, okay, I'm back to normal. But that's you. Oftentimes, people have just kind of shrunk back. Their dreams have gotten smaller. There's like a fear of loss in the background, and they don't realize, like, you know, people usually just ask you, like, oh, how are you? Are you happy? And they say yes, and they think they're happy, and it's a very, you know, left brain logical answer, but meanwhile they're unable to feel joy, and meanwhile they're not satisfied with their lives. So yeah, my book's designed to help people, one, to recover if they've been through something difficult, but also to identify that kind of danger zone there to not get stuck.
Yeah. And it's so important to be able to tap back in to joy. And would you say that self-trust is part of that? Like being able to come to a place where you trust yourself?
Yeah, because I would definitely tie it to like self-love, for example. Everything else, I think it's just, it can be very much surface level, you know? Because, for example, a lot of that work I was doing, it was all important, and some of those modalities have created profound effects in different people. But for me, I was not seeing that core, and if that foundation isn't taken care of, you're only like, you know, chipping away at the surface. So I didn't see that, and that's definitely self-love and self-trust. It's number one. Like that's the base.
Absolutely. It's that getting to know your real self, your true self.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I think of, like, when I talk about the different versions of myself, which, you know, that's the goal I would like to continue to change. But I know some people are thinking, well, why would I want to change myself? But I always think of it as the more I change, the more I'm becoming the true me, my true self. I'm just shedding away the stuff that doesn't belong.
Ah. Yeah, there's an analogy we have used on this show, several episodes. It's like a sculptor who gets a block of, you know, of clay or marble or wood, and to us it just looks like a lump of whatever, right? They see something and they start chipping away at what doesn't serve them, no longer needs to be there to reveal what's underneath, the beauty that's underneath.
That's so interesting you should say that. It's quite a synchronicity. My book starts, there's a poem in the beginning, and I talk about how we're all artists and our lives are, it's like artwork you're working on forever, just kind of working on that sculpture.
Beautiful, beautiful. So joy signals, at least in my mind, alignment, right? Rather than something that you earn, right? Joy is just this part of who we are that we can access really at any time if we tune in, right? And so for you, finding that joy sounds like it was very pivotal to your overall transformation.
Yeah, it was. And like when you just said that you can feel it at any time, you can access it at any time if you choose to do so. So that's what helped with that more advanced form of meditation I was doing, because there's a lot of practicing emotions before you feel it, and practicing, you know, your future before it happens, you know, the feelings of that future. So I think that was partially responsible for how I became, you know, so my days became so full of joy because I was practicing those emotions. And then sometimes, you know, I'd be driving my car and suddenly just hit with a wave of like, wow, joy and gratitude for, you know, quote unquote, no apparent reason, but, you know, there's always a reason for that, right? But it's so important. It's happiness, you could think of it as like energized happiness. So you can't mistake it for being something else. Whereas happiness is kind of flat. You can just, you know, it's easy to slip by your radar, so.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm curious to know how the nervous system safely can support like this emotional and personal expansion when you're coming out of that kind of upheaval.
Ooh, that's a good question. um, it's a process, right? So first, I think when someone's feeling like, okay, they're on solid footing and they're ready to start uh, moving forward in their lives in some way, creating some kind of change. I think one, it's getting comfortable with the idea of chaos, that you don't have all of the answers. Things can be still messy and up in the air. There's going to be a lot of unknowns, but just letting go of that need to control that and trusting that, wonderful surprises can come from the unknown too. So I think that's the first thing, just getting comfortable with that and not having all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because, yeah, there's no way we'll always have all the answers.
Yes.
But sometimes we have to tap into that intuitive knowing, right? That intuition that allows us to calm, in some ways, our central nervous system so that we can move forward.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so, in a lot of ways, as we joke, you're a very different human, a very different Chanoa than you were, say, 20 years ago,
Yes.
right? How would you describe yourself today?
Mm-hmm. um, I can start with how other people describe me. I've been told that people feel calm in my presence. Yeah, I have my own business, but my last job, everyone told me that. My manager, other people, colleagues, they would say, when you're on a call, you don't react to the things people are saying, like in the ways that we do. It's stressful. You're always so calm, and that helped us feel calmer. And that was like,
Beautiful.
that was helpful. Yeah, so I would say I'm a seeker, and you know, I'm just been so blown away by the changes in my life and where this whole journey has taken me that I don't know, it lights me up, and I've just now integrated this part of my life. So it's also very meaningful that I can then use the things that I've learned to help other people and see that impact.
Nice. Beautiful. In moving towards kind of what it is that you now do and offer in the world, why do you think authenticity is more powerful than strategy when it comes to success or visibility?
uh, well, we're back to alignment. Everything or we can also talk about how again, I was just chipping away at the surface, right? I didn't have that foundation. The self is the foundation. My definition, of a personal brand is the essence of who you are, and then how that essence is perceived. So a lot of people think it looks like, oh, I have to have the shiny bells and whistles, branding, or the best clothes, and things like that. Those things all have an effect and a place. But if you don't have the core of it, if you're not able to show up with confidence, bring your entire self to your business, if you are, you're afraid to get on video. I mean, everyone has their, fortes and things like that. But if you're hiding and you think the way to be successful is to mimic somebody else who's successful in your field, you're going to get some short-term wins, but you're going to be forgettable because people can't click with you in a way like the resonance goes much deeper when you are the real you. And a lot of that comes from a scarcity mindset. People are like, oh, if I show up as myself, you're basically niching down, but in terms of people. And so they're like, oh, well, maybe these people will stop following me, or maybe I'll lose that potential client. But you that's already losing a game. You can't win everybody over. But when you show up as yourself and it resonates, the effect is so profound. And yeah, so it's just like, It truly is magnetic when all of those elements come together. So we're definitely this secret to our own success.
Right. And I love the name of your company, Magnetize Your Personal Brand,
Thank you.
because that is exactly it. It's like it is magnetizing.
Right.
When people are their true and authentic selves out in the world, we all feel it,
Yes.
right? You can tell when someone is a fake, and then you can tell when someone is being true. And what's fun about people who are their true and authentic selves, they're also not trying to be perfect, right? If you ever noticed
It's
that,
so true. Yeah.
they can laugh at themselves. They'll make mistakes and it doesn't just like wear them out.
Yes. Yeah.
There's this deep authenticity that it's like they've gotten to a place where they know who they are. And so all of this outside, they realize this is the reality they've built, and they get to express who they are out here in the world.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so funny. I often think about how I'm happy that I'm a recovering perfectionist now. Because, just the nature of this kind of business, I'm sure doing like so many different podcasts, working with so many different people, there can be a lot of things that you're like, oh, I need to go, fix a name spelling there or something. And once upon a time, I would have been, sweating, like, this thing went live, my name is misspelled. It's like the end of the world. And now for me, it's like I'll share it and then tell them that the name was misspelled. Like there's no fire.
Yeah, exactly. It took me a while. I also am a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah.
When I was a young person, everything had to be just so. Just so. And probably over the last 10 years or so, I've let that go slowly but surely. And to the point now, I'm like, I'm doing this podcast. I'm showing up on social media. And it's like, okay, like all the things. Like all the things that I said more than 10 years ago, I would never do.
Yes. Yeah.
Indeed.
My first podcast interview a few years ago with a colleague I know well, even, not even video. No one's around to hear me record. Mm-hmm. I remember I had like all of these notes overly prepared, and she started asking me these organic questions that were like really left field, but she was so interested in that, area of marketing. And I just started sweating. I kept tripping over my words. And she's like, maybe my editor can fix it. And the editor was like laughing, like, there's nothing I can do with this. And it's so funny because but it reflected the person I still was at the time. And it's like, well, if you were surrounded by, like, let's say toxic, relationships. I don't want to call people toxic, but like toxic friendships, If you're walking on eggshells around people, if you have trouble setting boundaries and things like that, you'll be terrified when you're in the spotlight, Or if you're always judging yourself, because it's still, then you're going to think about how much everyone's going to judge you. So it's so funny. And then fast forward the first podcast interview I did about my book, it was only 3 years between those two incidents, and people were just kept talking more about how polished the episode sounded than the actual content. So it's just pretty funny, but we can all, leave these things behind, really.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think about people who kind of try to blend in, and for years I just tried to blend in. When I was a young person, I was just like, I do not need to be perceived. That was just basically where I was. But why does blending in often feel safer than standing out for people? What do you think?
I think that, again, that fear of judgment, which is really that fear of, people feel, it can be very painful for people to feel as if they're, they might be ostracized, somebody might have some criticism for them, but it has never been more dangerous in business to be bland. Right now we're fed with AI slop all day long. AI bots are commenting for people and they're not even adding value, they're just summarizing the post, and you'll see maybe 50 comments like that. At the
Yeah.
same time, it's never been easier to stand out. And
Yeah.
it's like,
That's right.
it's really nice to know, like, oh, just being yourself can help you, grow your success. So that's very meaningful. But yeah, right now, it's certainly not the time to play the game of blending in.
Absolutely. I agree. I very much agree with that. In the work that I do as a coach, I help people embody their new sense of self, their new identity, in order to then step into a greater impact in the world with the work that they do. And so embodiment is so important because, as you mentioned, AI, we're bombarded with information all the time, right? So it started with, the analog way that we used to get information, books and encyclopedias, the newspaper, watching the news, talking to people, reading people's books, to now we have the internet, social media, and now AI. So information is always coming at us. And I don't think, unless you're living under a rock, like, people know things.
Yeah.
People are getting the information that's truly needed. But the question always is, are they embodying the information? Are
Yeah.
they just intellectually learning and knowing, or are they allowing that information to settle in, right?
Yeah.
And so, how does embodying information, what you even teach in your work with people, how does it create more presence or trust or memorability?
Yeah, I mean, you can't fake it. It really comes down to all these like micro decisions we're making every day.
Mm.
That is also part of my program is just when you're working on positioning, there's a positioning section, but positioning the person, right? And while you're doing that, you're not just positioning for who you are today, or you're going to keep attracting the same opportunities. What's the ideal version of your business? And now you can't just like craft positioning and messaging and talk to people about this ideal version. You also have to think about, okay, well, who's the person running that ideal part of the business? Like, what do I need to leave behind? And where do I need to, step up to the plate in certain areas? And again, these are all internal exercises. So I know a lot of people can feel, if they take the online course version, they might feel a little bit like, oh, this is, and I just really stress it's not an exercise in judgment, or shame or criticism. It's like nobody has to know what your responses are, but it's really important to look in the mirror and see, okay, here's where I am, where's that gap, and this is what I'm saying I, desire, and does this really reflect that? So action is it's essential. Otherwise, it's just all like just a mental exercise.
Indeed, indeed. And I would venture to say embodied action, right? Like,
Yeah,
really taking in that information, but moving it out into the world with action, for sure.
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah. So there's this link between authenticity, manifestation, and these aligned opportunities for like growth, impact in the world, transformation in the world.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. And when somebody's in alignment, I guide people how to identify aligned opportunities, but then that starts to become, second nature. Because I notice there are a lot of, I call them like little initiations that happen. So when I say there's something I desire, I will often I'll often have like many opportunities that are very similar, but something's off. And they'll be very tempting. And it's like, are you sure that's what you desire? So you have to be willing to say, this is great, but this one part doesn't align with, I don't know, this dream, or this part of this doesn't check the values box, or the money's fantastic, but it's going to take up too much bandwidth, and the core of my business would suffer. So it's also being courageous enough to say no to things that are wonderful opportunities, but they're not wonderful for right now.
That's right. They may not be aligned for you in that moment.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you think about maybe people who you have worked with or could work with in the future, and I think about this for myself too as a coach, how do you help people move forward after loss without abandoning themselves? Because I think, like for yourself, you had such a big transformational experience in your life, which has kind of birthed the work that you do in the world. And I believe a lot of people's work that they do in the world comes after trauma or loss or some big transformational event in their lives. And so
Yeah.
how do you help them move forward after so that they're not abandoning themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in my book, I really advise that even as people feel the grief and the difficult feelings, in that period of time, like there's nothing to do really but to feel it and give yourself grace and space. But it's also important to check your thoughts and make sure you're compassionate with yourself the whole way, that you're not there like creating these these issues like the guilt, like, oh, I should be getting back to work and being at full capacity. Oh, I haven't called these people back. Or the person who passed away, like, I should have seen them the time that they said, like, let's do this, and all those things that come up. Just being really strict about really, like, standing guard, like, no, and just that's the most important way that I see to really make sure that you're there on your side as you move through these different stages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like rebuilding a life and maybe even a career in a work in the world with compassion, self-compassion.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And hopefully that rebuilding is a reflection of who they really are, as we were talking about, that authentic self, and not necessarily who they were, the old operating system or the old identity. And not an identity that's really someone else's, right? We're all raised and conditioned to be who our parents, our teachers, our maybe our spiritual communities want us to be, and we then have to kind of check that as we come into adulthood, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that rebuilding really does reflect who they really are.
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important. Yeah, every once in a while I catch myself. I'll have a thought and I'm like, that's not my thought. You hear something enough and I'm like, I don't need to think that.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think the danger of, or is there a danger in rushing healing? Just to be in the name of productivity. You mentioned earlier, like if someone has had a death in their lives, not rushing to get back to work. What's the danger that you see in people rushing their healing process?
Wow. It's just so easy to, compartmentalize the grief and not deal with it, which is kind of what I did in a way. I mean, I felt pain for a long time, but I didn't realize I didn't actually process it. So that's how those health challenges came up. So it's really important not to rush that process. And even in my book, I write, if you've just been through something, traumatic, I recommend you put this book down and come back to it later. Like, it's not like you had this tragedy happen yesterday and today you should be reading a book about. Like, no.
Right.
I'm as much of a fast mover as anyone else, wanting to do this, want to do that. And we have this society of like, we have to fix. And there's a time for that, but it's really important to just feel into it and see what it's bringing up for you also.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned like our society is this kind of fast-paced. I think it's fast-paced and we struggle with big emotions.
Hmm.
I've noticed this shift, at
Yeah.
least in the time I've been alive, of almost like covering people being requested to cover up their emotions or to tamp down their emotions, or when someone is grieving because of a family loss, people give them the assumed right amount of time, and then they're like, well, when are they coming back to work? you know
Yeah.
or when are they going to feel normal again, right? There's this pairing of the fast pace of our lives and our culture, but also this struggle, tension around big emotions that are displayed, especially publicly. It's almost like you have to do that at home with the blinds closed, doors locked, by yourself. It's not,
Yeah.
share any of that. Don't cry at work.
Thankfully, I mean, things are changing, but they're like pockets of change,
Yes,
right? We're
pockets.
starting to
I
see
agree.
people or hear people cry on interviews, and
Yeah.
there's a company out there, I think they're called Bereavement IO. They're like get in touch with companies, and they're showing them the importance of having longer time off and different
Beautiful.
packages for people. Yeah, and they're bringing awareness because some people get a day off, and someone in
Yep.
their immediate family passed away. It's just you know
Absolutely.
outrageous. But yeah, I mean, it all starts with us, right? The change.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm very grateful that since identifying the problematic friendships I had in my life, that I only have all the friendships I have in my life. They're just like all, I can show all the range of my emotion. And that's really nice. Or my meditation community on the retreats, you have people there, you have people crying sadness, tears of joy, frustration. It's all there. And I think, I think we're gonna see more of it as again in juxtaposition. The juxtaposition is that there's this AI like cold, kind of like empty trend,
Mm.
and I think the human side, people are gonna crave more and more of this like these real emotions, and so bottling up, it's not aligned with that.
Indeed, it is not. And I think that is, I've started seeing or hearing commercials that really talk about what you're sharing.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like the human connection. There's a radio station that has a commercial on there that talking about their human DJs, And then I heard another commercial somewhere else that talks about the fact that you get real live people when you
So
connect
funny.
with them. So people are really getting sensitive to this whole AI thing.
Humans
And you
are
can't blame
trending.
them. Yeah, you can't blame them at all.
Yeah.
And so there are different pockets where AI has infiltrated, but people are starting, I think, to push back a little bit. And so
Yeah.
I think it's going to be an interesting tug of war. That's the only way I can
Yeah.
describe it as we move forward over this. I probably next decade is is our humanity going to be chipped away, or is humanity going to push back?
Yeah, I mean, I've been excited by seeing the pushback because it would be great so that we keep it in its place. There's
Yes.
a wonderful use cases for that, and we keep it right there. But let's leave the art and all the things that are distinctly human. Let's leave the life to humans for sure.
Indeed, indeed. That is true. That is very true. And so, in your work with people, with real humans, um, who do you attract to your business?
Yeah, it's business owners, solopreneurs, uh, mostly women, but there's some men who are interested in change, which is
Sure.
great because it is personal transformation meets personal branding, and I
Yeah,
just feel like that market, women tend to be more open to it. But again, things are changing, so it's been
indeed.
great to see. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. All right. So, when you think about the real self, or a person's real self, there's nothing that needs to be fixed,
No.
right? There's nothing that needs to be outperformed or super high level polished. Like we're talking
No.
about people showing up as their authentic selves,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's what people are looking to see. I remember hearing about a year ago that there was this shift on YouTube that for a while we had gone to all shorts and I didn't understand it. I was just like, I would like to actually see an actual video. What's with these 2 minute, 3 minute videos? And it had gone on for months. And then all of a sudden there was a shift to long form.
Yeah,
All the
extremely
way
long
back
too.
extremely. Because one of my favorite podcasters, he would do an episode somewhere between an hour and a half to 3 hours.
Wow.
And I'm like, dude, I don't even have that much time to watch an episode. I have to break it up in,
Yeah.
in segments. But I love what he's doing because it is so authentic, right?
There it
It's
is,
an
yeah.
open conversation with his guests. And he has become one of the number one podcasters because of it. And so many people are going back to long form, and that's what I enjoy as well. And that's the shift. And when I read the article, they were saying it's because AI can't do that,
Oh.
right?
Okay.
We when we're watching people on podcast or something live on television, you're getting the human experience.
I
Right?
love
It's
that.
not this polished 3 minute thing that anybody can hold it together for 3 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So that's that I think that is heartening to me in that space that we've gotten away from these snippets. Shorts have their benefit, of course, because you get a short bit of information out there for people. But the long form really brings humanity back into play. And so I think more and more people are apparently watching YouTube as if they're watching television.
Yeah, I'm one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but it's also good news because there's so much talk about, how our brains have now searched for these quick hits of dopamine and how, the short form videos on, Reels and TikToks, how our brains have changed, but now you're looking at this, so it's like, oh, plot twist. So it's just nice to see, and a nice reminder of how, malleable our brains are and how we always
Yeah.
have this choice to change.
Exactly. It is so true. It is like the foundation of everything that we can shift, we can
Right.
change, we can evolve. And that's a powerful thing. All the way until our last breath, we can change.
Yes.
So yeah, so that works when life feels, that this idea of being our authentic selves, it helps life to feel more meaningful.
Mhm.
And I would also dare to say aligned, right, with
Yeah.
who we truly are and probably our purpose out in the world.
Yeah, that's key. Like, it just makes everything easier.
Yeah.
If you have like a long day, some days it's it's just not going to be, everything's not going to be so neat and controlled in your business. But when you are working to your purpose and when you are showing up as who you are and you're serving the people that you want to serve, it's a very different experience than, say somebody who's going into an office and they're not happy at the job, but they're afraid to change. They've been there for a while. They're like, oh, the market, look at the job market. It's not a good time to leave. And they just have all these excuses to stay there. And then they're
Yeah.
also showing up as, kind of like a sliver of themselves because they're also afraid to show up as who they are. My last job, I was with a long-term client and I took it on because I was working with mostly tech companies. And,
Okay.
the industry just got kind of crazy for a few years. So when they offered me a job, it's like, oh, it's flexible and I can still work with some of my clients. So I took it on for almost a year and a half, and it was great at first. And then then I was like, okay, I have to just return to my business. But it was really interesting, the psychology, like, because I knew, I'm a business person, like, I didn't have the reservations that employees had. I hadn't been strictly an employee for a very long time.
That's right.
So there were just things I would say in meetings that for me it's just like fine, but there's like no finesse for something like a political fear or something. And I would always kind of chuckle to myself, on mute, camera off, because I'd realize, wow, I don't know that I would feel that comfortable if I hadn't gone through this journey. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't have. It removes a lot of fears, and you just trust that, if I show up as me, it's going to work. And so it never ruffled feathers, even though, and I think it's because of that, and in fact, it did not, whereas I think somebody who if they didn't work on themselves, they'd have those hesitations, and so that would create that energy for them to there to be, an issue or a perceived issue.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there is a mindset. I heard a coach say this some time back, that there is an employee's mindset and there's an entrepreneur's mindset. And even if you're working for someone else, if you have an entrepreneur's mindset, you move about that workspace differently than an employee's mindset.
Yes, and savvy companies, they want their employees to be, they call them, I think, entrepreneurs, because they also come up with these like groundbreaking concepts, and they're, moving the companies forward. But the company would have to be, led by leadership that are dynamic like that. So it's interesting.
It is. Wow. Well, thank you, Chanoa, for this conversation. Could you share with the audience how they might be able to get in touch with you if they want to connect?
Yeah, you can find everything on my website, chanoainez.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Wonderful. And if today's conversation resonated with you at all, I invite you to reflect on a question. Where in your life might you be withholding the very qualities that make you powerful? Right? We have all been conditioned to become the original adults that we have become, right? But we have to then at some point question those conditionings. And some of those come with ideas about who we think we are, qualities that we hold about ourselves. And the things that we tamp down, try to suppress, or try to ignore are usually the things that are actually the most unique about us. It makes us unique and authentic and powerful. So where are you tamping down some things that you can just let fly? I also would encourage you all to explore Chanoa's work in her book, Dream On: How to Create the New Life of Your Dreams After Upheaval or Loss. There we go. And thanks for joining me on the Expansion Room. This is where inner work meets impact. We'll see you next time.